only to be in prison without reason. This is a real torture.
We used to say press freedom is a thermometer of the democracy, and the thermometer is broken by now in Turkey.
So press freedom and freedom of expression, what's wrong with Turkey? This is, there is a question mark, because we are all sad in Europe to see what's happening to journalists in Turkey, to intellectuals in Turkey, to writers in Turkey. Today, we can count not less than 72 professional journalists who are in jail in Turkey, and that is something really becoming a big problem for us, for all of us in Europe. On my right here, the honorable gentleman here is Philippe Leruth. He's playing at home because I don't know how many years he has been working here, but he is now today the vice president of the European Federation of Journalists. And Philippe has been several times to Turkey on behalf of the European Federation of Journalists to monitor some trials, to see what's happening to their families, to the journalists. He has been to courtrooms, we met some lawyers, so he will share with us his experience and also the point of view of the European Federation of Journalists on this matter.
When I thought about this topic, I tried to remember when was there the first time I was mixing with the problem of press freedom in Turkey, and that was a long time ago when I was the president of the Association Belge. I remember very well I was phoned by a young Turkish woman living in Liège, and she was in trouble because her brother-in-law, who was a journalist in Turkey, had been sentenced to 2 years jail because he had written articles about the Kurdish problem. By that time, that was the time of the military, and I remember I had a contact with the then Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Louis Michel, who had a quick reaction on this very case, and we had a lucky outcome. And then time went by, and like many Belgians, I think, I thought democracy is back in Turkey and everything is normal, press is free, and we have no problem of this kind anymore. And this lasted until 2010, when I was by then, and I'm still the vice president of the European Federation of Journalists, and our Turkish member union, the Türkiye Gazeteciler Sendikası, sorry from the pronunciation, the Turkish Union of Journalists, invited us to hold a general meeting in Istanbul with, as a team, press freedom in Turkey.
When was that?
In 2010. And it was an unforgettable general meeting. You might remember by that time that there were problems in the airplanes due to a volcano in Iceland, and we had the pleasure to experience a trip back from Istanbul by bus. It was, but it has nothing to do with the topic, indeed. And then we realized by then that there was indeed a press freedom problem in Turkey, because in 2010 some 60 journalists were imprisoned. And we became aware that this was a very heavy problem, and we decided to mobilize the European and International Federation on this very problem. So the following year, by the Press Freedom Day on 3 May 2011, I traveled to Istanbul, where I attended a meeting organized by the Turkish Platform for Press Freedom and Freedom of Expression. The following day, I was supposed to visit detained journalists in the Silivri jail. I was denied the access, officially because I am a foreign journalist. So I couldn't get there, but my Turkish colleagues were authorized to visit their colleagues. So I went with them, I traveled with them, and I had the privilege to stand for 6.5 hours in front of the Silivri jail, witnessing the families visiting their relatives in the jail. And I was wearing a t-shirt, I'm sorry, I have this t-shirt not here, written in Turkish, of this Turkish platform for press freedom and freedom of expression. My third visit was in November last year. That was the second hearing in the so-called ODA TV process. And I experienced two things. This process was about to resume under heavy media attention. And the Turkish Union of Journalists organized a huge demonstration just in front of the Justice Palace in Istanbul. First of all, I say I was very surprised when I saw the Justice Palace. I know the Justice Palace in Brussels, which is already a huge monument. When I stand in front of this immense palace, it was really impressive. What I found very positive, because I'm not sure we would have been allowed to do the same in Brussels. We were allowed to have this demonstration just in front of the Justice Palace, and the police was there, but didn't disturb us at all. I would mention the fact that last June we wanted to have a little demonstration with far less people than those ones in Brussels in front of the Turkish embassy. We were allowed to have a demonstration, but we had to keep 50 meters from the Turkish embassy. We weren't allowed. So I would say it was a rather positive sign that we were allowed to demonstrate, and we were allowed to go in the hearing in the courtroom. A courtroom extremely short in such a huge building. It was very, very strange for us indeed to see the conditions in which the process was to go on. I remember sitting on the ground and I couldn't see anything because there were so many people in such a short room for a hearing which lasted very few time, by the way.
Philippe, you don't speak Turkish, so how were you? How did you do to understand what was going on during the trial?
I must confess I didn't understand very much, but of course I had my Turkish colleagues sitting near to me who explained me. They didn't translate word to word, but they explained me what was going on. The next day we had a meeting with the families of detained journalists, and the third day we flew to Ankara. We had originally hoped to meet with the Turkish Minister for Justice, but he declined our demand to meeting. So we met with the vice presidents of all parliamentarian groups within the Turkish parliament. And we had an open discussion with all parties, and included the AKP, the governing party. And the message we received from the AKP was the following: but those journalists are not indicted because they are journalists or for their journalistic work. They are indicted because they are members or they make propaganda for terrorist organizations. That was the message. Of course, we don't accept this explanation because, for instance, when we go into the concrete accusations against journalists, I had followed the case of Barış Terkoglu, who is a journalist who was adopted by the Belgian association, because after that meeting we launched a campaign of adoption of detained Turkish journalists. And for instance, Barış Terkoglu, in his accusation act, there was the registration of a phone conversation. So the phone was tapped. His editor was in contact with him, and he said, "Do you want once again to write an article about this Ergenekon case? Hold it, we have done enough. It's enough, and we are not the official Ergenekon media." And the accusation said, "This is the proof. They have made enough." So they wanted to support the Ergenekon association, while this was a quite normal exchange between an editor and a journalist. For instance, if I say to my editor, I will write this afternoon an article about the Belgian railways, he could tell me, "Stop it, you already wrote 4 articles last week, I think it's enough." That's not
So the journalists were listened, phone tapped.
Yeah.
Is it also happening in Belgium? People are
No,
listening to journalist conversation between the editors and the journalists? Or?
It happened in Belgium, but we have, fortunately, in Belgium a law on protection of journalistic sources. I don't say it won't happen again, but if it happened, it's illegal, and we have a legal answer to this kind of problem. What we said to the AKP party, and what we repeated after this visit, is that we denounce the criminalization of journalistic work. By other words, the Turkish authorities are saying, if you write about a terrorist organization, you are a terrorist by yourself. And it's of course absurd. Do you think, for instance, that anyone would say that Roberto Saviano is a member of the Napolitan Camorra because he exposed what the Camorra is doing? So what I would say once again, we are not mixing with internal Turkish policy. We acknowledge Turkey is a democracy where election is free. The very problem is press freedom is, we used to say press freedom is a thermometer of the democracy, and the thermometer is broken by now in Turkey. We are not saying this journalist with this political opinion is right and the other is wrong. What we are telling is all the journalists with all the different political opinion must be able to express their convictions, their comments, and we will defend all the journalists of every political trend if they are impeached of expressing themselves. And I would, not to be too long, I would add two things. The first one, sometimes we are told, oh, you have an action against Turkey, but may you attend that we are supporting the Turkish Union of Journalists, Turkish associations united in the Turkish platform for press freedom and freedom of expression, that we are supporting the Turkish colleagues, and we are supporting the Turkish civil society. It's not at all directed against Turkey, of which, and I express myself personally here, I'm convinced Turkey should and could play a major role of example of democracy in this very region, but provided, of course, it respects all the conditions of democracy, and press freedom is one of the key elements of democracy. The second thing I would like, you might be saying, okay, you are a federation of journalists and you are defending and pleading the cause of journalists, but I noticed by the ODA TV process that delegates from the European Parliament were attending all hearings, because the European Parliament is very unquiet about the situation in Turkey. Some weeks ago there was a report from the European Commission on the progress of Turkey toward membership maybe, and what they point out in this document are also for instance, the criminalization of the work of journalists. I read the application of Articles 6 and 7 of the anti-terror law in combination with Articles 220 and 314 of the Turkish Criminal Code leads to abuses. In short, writing an article or making a speech can still lead to a court case and a long prison sentence for membership or leadership of a terrorist organization. I don't say this, the European Commission is saying this. May I recall also that the Council of Europe, of which Turkey is a founding country, is maintaining country under monitoring because of those problems of lack of press freedom, freedom of expression. And to conclude that the European Court of Human Rights have issued many rulings against condemning Turkey for violation of Article 8, article mentioning freedom of expression.
On my left side here, we have the distinguished publisher, columnist, well-known columnist in Turkey, Mr. Ragip Zarakolu. He's a Turkish columnist, writer, publisher, and he's been subject to a lifetime harassment from the Turkish authorities. Welcome today, Mr. Zarakolu, and he will share us and he's trying to explain us what is this KCK trial that we are all looking for, among other people.
It's terrible going backward for Turkey too. And at that times we were arrested with a group of the intellectuals, and it was a bag trial because you put everybody in the bag, different thinking, different newspapers, different circles of the intellectuals, and you accuse them as a part of illegal organization. Now the same method made with KCK trials, and they collected many people, arrested them, and put them in the bag of the KCK. So it is a very crowded, impossible to understand.
I was just going to ask you, what do you understand by this KCK trial? Because in Europe we see, Oda TV is for the deep state and KCK is for the Kurdish side of the trial. Is it?
Yes, it's a kind of same mentality. Instead of to struggle with really with the violent in the politics, but to prevent oppositional views and to misusing of anti-terror laws. Turkey is the worst example of misusing anti-terror laws in the world. Also, there are critics because of that practice from West countries, also from United States or other, because Clinton told you are giving terrorism support because you show everybody as terrorists. So because of this, the radical views can find support. So for me, for example, I am a journalist and I'm a publisher, and there was going on KCK trials in Diyarbakır. And so I decided to publish a book about KCK trial. What is that? Because I didn't know what is KCK also. And then a Kurdish writer wrote a book. Then they put immediately us in trial with anti-terror law, propaganda of terrorism. And then it was illegal for me, for example, there was no legal responsibility for me, but both writer and me was convicted to make terrorist propaganda because of that book. But I think this wasn't enough.
So the book was seen as a propaganda act?
Yes, as a 1,000 printed book accepted as a proof. And so as journalism and also as publishing, you are publishing a book about the actual problem, and it was banned and put in trial and we were convicted. But this wasn't enough for the authority. Later I was arrested to help terror organization, but I was convicted. The decision was waiting at appeal court. I wasn't arrested, but this time I was arrested. It is also basic universal law condition. You can accuse somebody with only one thing, and you cannot accuse later for the same thing second time. And the writer and me was arrested, and I had to stay 5 months in the prison. I was arrested that intellectuals trial in 1971 under the militarist regime, and I had to stay 3 months. Afterwards, we were all released.
So 3 months during the
3 months. And after the coup, 1980, again, militarist dictatorship, I was arrested because I was editor of Left Daily. And it took 3 weeks. I was arrested. 2 weeks in the police, 1 week at the army center, prison.
And were you tortured or bad?
No, I wasn't tortured. Instead of, I discuss why we journalists must do news about the torture. And they accuse me, you are showing us target by this kind reviews, news. That time military dictatorship, and sure, my trial went on 10 years. And in 10 years I couldn't have had any passport to go outside because of that trial. But at the end, I was acquitted. It began with military court, it finished in the civil court. It's very upset for me. This time I was arrested under a civil government, and I was arrested by a civil court, and I had to stay 5 months in the prison. Now I have many friends. I had to leave them in prison. Their reasons the same with me, but because they were Kurdish, they are in prison now. Their arresting is going on. I was released because there was a successful campaign for me. Also, my reports about freedom of expression during 15 years I was writing, known by international, not only international organization, known but by the governments also from United States or European Union and other countries. So it was very hard to accept me to be a supporter of so-called terrorism. Yeah. Why I was arrested? Because I planned to support academic liberty, and I was planning conferences in the United States universities. They don't care Europe, but they care United States. There is a very serious cooperation with two governments, and then so the reaction was effective for me. But my son is going on in prison, the same reasons, and they want we were released because we were chosen to make forgotten the other ones, because everybody focused on us. Later, during last months, after some months, many of them forgotten. Sure, there is a very important subject now for the journalists. It's very important, and but there are other people also. Human rights organization activists, they are arrested, elected mayors, they are elected parliamentarians. Yes, they were elected and they weren't released. And also there are activists of a legal party workers, supporters, and this is a legal party, and their group in the parliament, and this is a not fair game in politics, because they broke their legs and arms before the election next year. There is a local election, so there are, with KCK trials, there are people, some thousands of people arrested.
Thousands of people arrested.
Yes, and so these people cannot work for the elections. So, so it is a kind of sentence for their success in local elections, because in Kurdish region, this Kurdish party is really a local power, and government party is in opposition there because they didn't get. In Turkey, we need a serious mentality changing, living the concept of national security, the concept of interior enemies. And so the AKP government transformed now a new kind front with army. Now there is the army and AKP cooperation now, after the changements. So instead of AKP going in on the direction of democracy and pull the army behind, but instead of they changed the project for authoritarian, civil authoritarian regime, unfortunately. There is a kind of McCarthyism.
McCarthyism.
Yes, to show everybody, oh, there are complots, oh, and everybody connected with the complots. It's sure the Ergenekon trial is very important, but the mentality of Ergenekon is going on some level. Only the boss was changed. Before the boss was generals, now the boss are civilian, the police commissars.
Jean-Paul Defossé, je suis parlementaire, ex-journaliste. Et je voudrais vous faire part de mon indignation. Bien sûr, d'abord, mon indignation par rapport à ce qui se passe en Turquie, ça va de soi. Je ne vais pas y revenir, être redondant là-dessus. Et mon admiration pour le combat de tous ces gens qui se battent pour faire libérer les intellectuels, les journalistes, etc. Là-dessus, je ne reviens pas. Ma deuxième indignation vient du monde politique belge. Il a fallu 1 an pour faire voter au Parlement de la communauté française une résolution condamnant ce qui se passe en Turquie par rapport aux journalistes. Et encore, il a fallu la diluer, si je puis dire, la transformer en une résolution à l'eau tiède, en y ajoutant à la Macédoine, la Serbie, la Bosnie-Herzégovine et le Monténégro, pour ne pas stigmatiser la Turquie. Donc, 1 an de combat pour que le monde politique enfin accepte de voter une résolution, je le répète, à l'eau tiède. Mais ma troisième indignation et mon interrogation, je ne comprends pas à quel point la presse belge en particulier est silencieuse, entretient, semble-t-il, une omerta par rapport à ce qui se passe en Turquie. Pour revenir à cette notion de la communauté française, qui, je le répète, était vraiment un truc à l'eau tiède, il n'y a pas eu, vous entendez, alors que ça a été voté à l'unanimité il y a 15 jours, une ligne, à ma connaissance, ni un article, ni un mot, ni dans la radio, ni dans la télévision. Jusqu'à présent, à la télévision belge, que ce soit RTL ou la RTBF, en radio, en télévision, à ma connaissance, on n'a jamais parlé, en tous les cas de manière significative, de ce scandale qui se passe en Turquie. Alors moi, je m'interroge sur ce que c'est le métier de journaliste. Je suis indigné véritablement par rapport, et honteux par rapport à ce qui se passe avec mes anciens collègues. Ici, je ne vois pas une seule de chaîne de télévision belge, ni en radio, ni en télévision. Alors moi, je ne comprends pas, je ne sais pas ce qui se passe, je ne sais pas ce que c'est les priorités journalistiques, les priorités éditoriales. Je pense qu'un combat comme celui que mène Philippe Leruth est essentiel. Dans le journalisme, je pense que vous devez, toi Philippe, il est temps de secouer, avec les moyens qui sont les tiens, c'est pas toi que je m'en cause, tu le sais bien, mais au moins avoir un article, je ne sais pas lequel, mais en tous les cas dire, c'est quoi ça? C'est inacceptable, c'est pas des plombiers zingueurs et qui sont en tôle en Turquie, ce sont des journalistes qui font le même métier que ceux qui sont indifférents chez nous. Et donc je pense qu'il est temps de secouer le cocotier par rapport à la presse. Ce n'est pas du militantisme qu'on leur demande, hein, c'est de faire le métier, c'est-à-dire de parler de ce genre de choses. Voilà. Et bravo encore pour le combat que vous menez.
When we ask to the Turkish authority here in the European Parliament or Commission here about arrested journalists, they often using that those arrested journalists are linked to the terrorist groups like KCK or the Turkish leftist groups. Do you know which kind of the evidences they have when they are saying that? Because I don't know if they have proof about that, or they're just saying that to make them, like a black-white propaganda. What do you think? Do they have any evidences when they say those journalists are linked to the terrorist groups or the Turkish leftists?
Just one question for Mr. Zarakolu. I heard you say this during your speech. You mentioned that the AKP just changed their project. The initial, what you were just supposing that it was a democratic project, changed into a totalitarian project. And you said this because you saw that they were just like linking much more with the army. So my question is, do you think that the army is no more secular, or does it mean that the AKP is no more religious? Or is there any other explanation?
I just want to know, how do you perceive from Turkey the campaigns that are being done everywhere in Europe to support journalists, etc. What would you answer the authorities when they say that the journalists are there because they're terrorists? No other, evidence is given. Thank you.
Now we feel cheated now by the government because they declared the reform program and also they asked us our views. They got our offers, and there is nothing now to change. What is happening? They are using the state apparatus made by military dictatorship. They are acting with unlegitimate constitution. So they lost also their base for legitimation because they are working authoritarian rules given by the totalitarian mentality constitution. So now AKP also going in a kind of legitimation crisis like the other parties happened in Turkey, like Demirel's party, like Özal's party. All these so-called civil governments prefer to use the possibility given by the militarist constitution. Sure, they did serious reforms also. For example, for the minorities, Christian minorities, the first time the minorities could get back their property, they feel better, but because there is no minorities now, very little groups, so also it is very good for the image of Turkey. Also at the beginning they don't have a paradigma, nationalist paradigma, they have a religious paradigma. So for them it was easier to make a kind of empathy with Christian religions. Instead of the project to build up Kemalist nationalist generations, new generation, their project is now to make up, to produce with new education system, with other ways by trials, or for example, there are more trials about the books, heretical literature, for example. They are using more the people's ahlak, or the traditions, to respect traditions of the, or to prevent critique of religion.
What's the objective of the government or the new AKP ideology?
Ideology is now like all authoritarian projects to give shape next generations. So to create believer generations instead of to leave people free to select the belief or not to share. So there is also another shape, another form of Kemalist looking to the society.
And can you just say a short word about the evidence, because this was one of the questions. Every time we ask this to Turkish officials here visiting Europe, they say they are not journalists, they are in jail for their terrorist activities. What are the evidence?
Anti-terror laws, there is no need proofs.
No need to prove.
About evidence, I have here a piece. This is a piece read by Soner Yalcin, who is the owner of the Oda TV. He was arrested on 14 February 2011. He is still in jail. And once in front of the court, he said, "What are the evidence? Infected files in our PCs. The PCs of the Oda TV collaborators were seized, and they told, we have found files proving our accusations." And the defendant said, "We don't know those files. It took more than 1.5 years to have the evidence that those files were introduced via viruses and that the users of the PCs never opened them." Other piece of evidence, Soner Yalcin said, "I make approximately 7,500 telephone calls a year. And in the last 2 years, I made 9 telephone calls with Yasin Küçük, who is also arrested. And for the prosecutor, those 9 telephone calls among 15,000 were the evidence there was a conspiracy with Yasin Kusi. That's the kind of evidence we have to witness in such cases.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And something we want to add, Mr. Zarakolu?
For example, for me, evidence was it was a newspaper news about the opening of BDP, Peace and
Democracy.
the Democracy Party's political academy. To go, I went there and I made a short speech. So the proof was a newspaper news.
So
yes.
the article published was approved
In the newspaper.
the evidence.
Yeah, 2 years ago they published the news. 2 years later it became a proof, a newspaper news. Or for my son, because my son in PhD and he was lecturer at Marxist Academy in Istanbul about history of political thought. For lecturing, not problem to Marxist Academy, Nazım Hikmet Academy, but lecturing at the Kurdish Party's academy this is a problem. For proof, my son to lecturing about the political thought, philosophy beginning from Aristotle, coming today with the examples, and he's a specialist on Thomas Hobbes. His thesis on is Thomas Hobbes, and he translated books of Hobbes and translated a report of the International Judge Organization in Switzerland about the independence of the justice in Turkey. It's a serious proof, sure. And for my Kurdish teacher, Mülazım Özcan, he's not a member of any political activity. He is vice chair of Istanbul Kurdish Institute, and he's a certificate from Uppsala University, and he was accepted as specialist in Turkish security courts. And only the proof is the telephone calling about asking how his friend, something happened to you because the police attacked during the peace demonstration September 1. So this talk shows he's a militant.
Can I ask you something? Yes. Because your son, Deniz Zarakolu, is still in jail, arrested now.
Yes.
Why they have released you and not your son? Because as you're explaining, you committed the same crime, if I may say like this. I mean, publishing.
His crime is harder.
Why?
Because he lectured.
He lectured.
More. I lectured only once.
Only once. He did it several times.
Are you afraid of your life? Because Hrant Dink was murdered, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And as you have to go back to Turkey, have you a problem, or are you afraid about your life? That's my question.
We saw during Ergenekon trials, there was some lists about the people who is working on Armenian topics, like Taner Akçam or Oral Çalışlar. The same group showed as us also, or MHP showed us target before. But now that policy, I think, stopped with Hrant Dink murder. So at a point he saved our lives. He saved, because there was a so huge reaction. 10,000 people were in the street after his death in Istanbul. Also there is a huge reaction in the world. But I don't care.
Mr. Zarakolu, you had the strange privilege of being imprisoned by all the major Turkish regimes over the past 40 years. So I was wondering, how did you see life inside prison change or over these past 40 years under the different Turkish regimes. And what would you say was is the most remarkable change if you compare your first imprisonment in 1971 and your recent imprisonment in 2011?
Like Turkish capitalism, there is a change of quality in the service in the prisons. I advise you, it's better than 40 years ago. The conditions as the police, secret police is better also. You can try also. Don't afraid so much. They gave a bed now, battaniye, also the cover, also food not so bad. But I don't like food in prison because they were very oily, not so healthy. There is also pressure of isolation and so only to be in prison without reason, this is a real torture. This government is talking so much about reforms but doing nothing.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this conference, and hope to see you next time for the next events in different languages also. Thank you very much.